So he then asserts the scientific method liberates us to pursue truth, regardless of who we are. And he'd, by this point in the book, already denigrated polylogisms, which kind of assigns the idea that there is a universally applicable instrument to understanding the world. That's denigrated by all the postmodernists like Simone de Beauvoir, who we're covering soon, who said logic in masculine hands is a tool of violence, and that women genuinely don't understand rationality, so they are more likely to believe an anecdote told in the line to pay a check-in or in a drawing room than a scientific study. And then you look at all other sources and they're all stories. So it's like, you're just manipulating women. Right.
It's funny how feminists always turn out to be the most sexist towards women.
Yeah. I'm not playing the left of the real racist cards, but they have an awfully low opinion of them, don't they? So then he says, a discipline viscerally despised by many progressives is expressly anti-racist in that it recognises that underneath many of our surface differences, human minds were born of the same evolutionary forces, irrespective of our racial and ethnic backgrounds. Environmental forces or culture do affect our thinking styles, reasoning and decision-making, but these effects are not immutable elements of one's race or ethnicity. There is no black mind or white mind, no white male way of knowing or indigenous way of knowing. There is only one truth, and we find it through the scientific method. Sure, we can also use other epistemological tools, but it's like saying there's an objective undercurrent to reality, and we're all engaged in a collective project of understanding it and how to live in concert with it. And that's why you can assert objective morality.
Mm-hmm. Do we have time for a comment? Or?
Please do, yeah.
We got Captain Charlie the Beagle. As disgusting as most think of it, the word parasitism is fascinating. The world of parasitism is fascinating, if I can actually read. I did work on them, marine parasites, for my thesis, and it is interesting. The fact you can have parasites that are themselves parasitized is interesting, meaning woke ideas can themselves be hijacked to comply with conservative ideals. Also, a great thing about studying parasites was I always had a seat next to me free in the library.
Well, it's not just that. It's also, if the parasites are parasitising the parasites, that's why you've now got the feminists breaking down along the intersection of trans and turf. And I'm just happy to watch them devour each other because I don't like either of them. Yeah,
I mean, it's like we were saying all the way back in 2015 that this whole thing is an Ouroboros, isn't it? It's a snake devouring its own tail.
So I wanted to go on to the assertion that if there is or isn't a hierarchy of knowledge, because I think we might have some contention here, and I'm happy to be wrong. But Saad says, by definition, science is or should be an apolitical process. Scientific truths and natural laws exist independent of researchers' identities. Agreed. The distribution of prime numbers does not change as a function of whether the mathematician is a white heterosexual Christian man or a transgendered Muslim differently sized obese individual. All satire aside, science is liberating precisely because it does not care about what your identity is. It is the epistemological means by which we seek to understand the world using evidentiary rules that are unbiased. There is no other game in town, no other way of knowing. Now, I puzzled through this, and I think that there are equally valid tools, and I think this might lead on to a longer podcast down the road, because I know Carl's also very interested in stuff like this. But there are other valid epistemologies based on the context in which they're placed. As we've already said, the tautological statements for understanding morality, or tautological reasoning like all bachelors are unmarried. Within those words, there are concepts which are just proven. Otherwise, you don't need to go around and do a scientific survey of bachelors.
Well, yeah, you can verify it just by looking up the meaning of the words, can't you?
Exactly, yeah. So you don't need empiricism necessarily for that, or inferences and inductive reasoning that you can create hypothetical scenarios and move backwards from that. There's obviously a problem in lots of libertarianism, as Harry and I discussed when discussing Nozick, that they create their own mind palace of hypothetical testing grounds, run with the principle on that, and go, and this will play out in society exactly as I think of it. So there's a danger of doing something like that.
You're on about the sort of abstract reasoning used in things like Austrian economics.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's useful for formulating moral principles far more than empiricism actually is, but the actual implementation of it, you would need it in conjunction with empiricism and, dare I say it as someone on the spectrum, but a little bit more understanding of human nature, just how people work, that sort of thing. It's not just about empirical testing as the only game in town.
Okay, well, I can address this. I think that if I use my opinion on economics as an analogy, I think it would be quite useful to apply it to what you're talking about here, in that I would probably describe myself as an Austrian style, or having an Austrian style economic perspective, but I still believe in the Chicago school style of proofing your concepts, in that you have data to back up your assertions about things. So I think that through melding both of those together, they don't necessarily have to be of equal parts. I think ultimately empiricism is the best way of doing it, because there are methods within empiricism, such as various forms of statistical testing, where you can calculate to a mathematical level of certainty that's basically it makes negligible the amount of probability that it's been created by chance, to such a degree that you can make conclusions out of things. It's how a systematic review or a meta-analysis has more explanatory power than just a single study, in that it's a larger data set and it's cross-referenced among multiple different ways of doing things. So it evens out the idiosyncrasies of certain approaches. And I think that there's a lot more power in that than perhaps other areas, because it's a lot more rigorous in trying to get rid of errors in its working out of the truth.
Yeah, you've got a cross-reference of various different knowledge systems, which is a nomological network of epistemologies, basically. If you can not only prove it with a bunch of different tests within the systems themselves, but prove it by all systems, and the concepts you're trying to test is going to be more valid. And so I think that may have been, to be charitable, a linguistic misstep by Professor Saad to say it's the only game in town there.
Yeah, I think that he's trying to emphasise that it's the most significant, as I would. And I imagine if we had him here and said, well, our personal experience is completely worthless, he'd be like, no, of course not.
No.
So I think that it's just a quirk of how he's phrased it more than anything.
Yeah, maybe I'm just being pedantic. Happy to be corrected.
Sorry.
Please do.
One more comment. I'm sorry for potentially mispronouncing your name, but it's Scandinavian and I really can't pronounce them very well. But Tuomas Vanio, I think. A shaman can call lightning by a trick called confirmation bias. You just need to be doing a certain action until the desired natural occurrence transpires, and you can proclaim, "Ta-da!" People who do not know any better will be none the wiser, and you might genuinely believe that a particular action manifested a specific end result. The same process works for rain dance. That's very true.
But hitting a slow TV or a slow Wi-Fi router does actually work.
It makes you feel better as well.
Yeah.
It makes you able to tolerate the...
Or when I'm waiting for the lights to change to cross the road and I snap my fingers at the traffic light and it goes red, it's like, oh, power. Anyway, I'm a child. So on to nomological networks, just to explain the concept to our audience. So they were created by L.J. Cronbach and P.E. Meal. The APA Committee on Psychological Tests found
American
it necessary...
Psychological Society.
Thank you. Sorry for the oversight. Found it necessary to distinguish 4 types of validity established by different types of research and requiring different interpretation. So stipulating a minimum of 4 dimensions of measurement in a psychological assessment is setting like the gold standard of whether or not it should be administered to patients, because if you're playing with people's minds, you really should take care.
Yes.
So there is a critique of where Saad doesn't define nomological networks to the layman in this book, because he is very good at defining actual psychological methods. The best way to do it is when he and Peterson were talking about the 5 senses, but that analogy was omitted, and I think that it would be a bit stronger if this were revised to include that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. I mean, I'm familiar with it just because 4 years of university, pretty unavoidable.
I was mildly familiar with it because my ex-missus did psychology, but I think she only took the degree to self-diagnose, so there we go. So Saad, the way he demonstrates nomological networks and how they work in this book was itself really interesting, and I like the example he used, and he used it for sexual selection because he's an evolutionary psychologist. Nomological networks of cumulative evidence constitute a modern manifestation of Darwin's synthetic approach. Suppose you wish to demonstrate that men's universal preference for the hourglass figure was shaped by evolution. How would you go about achieving such a task? Well, look at all the evidence. Number 1, the hourglass figure has been associated with greater fertility and superior health. Number 2, across a broad range of cultures, online female escorts advertise the hourglass figure to prospective patrons. Whether they're lying about said measurements is immaterial.
I think this actually answers our previous question, because he's using non-empirical evidence here, isn't he?
Yes.
He's using a vast array of different evidentiary forms.
Well, I wouldn't say it's non-empirical, really. I mean, you are using... and you're sampling, I would say.
But it is not in the scientific sense necessarily.
Yes, yeah. Number 3, escorts who possess the hourglass figure command larger fees. There's a pay gap for the phi gap, I suppose. Statues and figures spanning varied cultures across several millennia exhibit the desired hourglass figure. I know Carl and Callum did a segment on this, comparing ancient statues to contemporary bikini-clad women. There is a trend. Number 5, Playboy centerfolds and Miss America winners throughout the 20th century possess the preferred hourglass figure. Number 6, men's preference for the hourglass figure has been documented across diverse cultures and races using many methods, including brain imaging and eye tracking, much like, who's the streamer? Greek god who says, no, I'm not going to look at it this time, I'm not going to look, looks up at the screen. Damn it! Straight to the... Yeah. And then number 7 is the most interesting. Men who have never had the gift of sight are also drawn to the hourglass figure, using touch to establish the preference. I'm sure that was an interesting experiment, but men who
just
have never
having
seen...
loads of blind men touching up women in the... Yeah,
I need to participate. I've never been... What is this?
Us psychologists do get up to some strange stuff.
Singing Stevie Wonder songs as you're walking through the lab.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.